Queens were executed here, princes vanished here, and behind these walls, power was so merciless that love, loyalty, and innocence could disappear overnight inside the terrifying silence of the tower. Imagine London nearly 1,000 years ago, when a powerful new ruler looked across the city and knew victory alone was not enough. He needed something permanent, visible, and impossible to ignore. That ruler was William the Conqueror, and after taking England 1066, he understood that if London was to obey him, its people had to see Norman power rising in stone. So beside the Thames, construction began on what would become the White Tower, a massive fortress meant to dominate the skyline, command attention, and make conquest feel permanent. From the very beginning, this was never just a military building, because it also carried a message. England had a new master, and his rule would be watched, enforced, and remembered. And as those walls rose higher, the tower began its long transformation into something far greater than one keep, becoming the foundation of a place where authority, fear, and history would converge. As that convergence deepened, the site expanded beyond its original form, with new walls, guarded gates, defensive towers, and a moat slowly turning one fortress into a powerful enclosed world. Inside those growing defenses, the tower became more than a warning to enemies, because kings also used it as a royal residence, where protection, ceremony, and status could exist together. That combination gave the tower a strange dual nature, because within the same walls, a monarch could sleep in security, while others looked at those stones and saw intimidation. And over time, that darker meaning grew stronger, because the tower started receiving prisoners whose names, titles, and beliefs mattered deeply, turning its chambers into spaces filled with uncertainty and political danger. This was not an ordinary prison for common crime, but a place where nobles, rivals, traitors, and dissenters waited under guard, knowing their fate could reshape their lives forever. For some of those prisoners, confinement meant fear and silence, but for others it meant waiting, reading, praying, and leaving carved words behind, as if stone itself could remember them. And as more powerful names passed through these walls, the tower's reputation deepened until it became known not simply as a fortress, but as a place where fortune could collapse overnight. Few stories capture that collapse more powerfully than Anne Boleyn's, because she'd not arrived first in disgrace, but in triumph, entering the tower as England's newly crowned queen. When she entered then, everything around her suggested glory, legitimacy, and rising influence. As crowds watched, ceremony surrounded her, and the tower seemed less like a prison than power itself. But the same walls that once reflected her greatness would soon receive her again under suspicion, and that brutal reversal is exactly what makes her tower story unforgettable. She returned to the tower no longer surrounded by celebration, but by guards, accusations, and a silence heavy with danger, as royal favor vanished and political survival suddenly mattered more. Soon she faced charges of adultery, incest, and treason, accusations so devastating that they destroyed her position almost instantly and transformed a queen into a woman standing before judgment. Even now, historians still question whether those charges reflected proven truth, or whether they were driven by fear, faction, and Henry VIII's urgent need for control. As her downfall accelerated, the tower stopped feeling like a symbol of royal magnificence and became the final narrowing space where accusation, isolation, and destiny closed around her. Then, on May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn was executed inside the tower, and in that moment, her fall became larger than one death, becoming a permanent symbol of dangerous proximity to power. And because her death carried that meaning, the tower itself became even more feared, as people saw it not only as stone and walls, but as power deciding who remained. That fear did not end with Anne, because the same fortress would witness other royal tragedies, including women whose names survived precisely because the tower turned their final moments into history. One of them was Catherine Howard, Henry VIII's fifth wife, whose youth, fear, and downfall gave the tower another deeply human story, where vulnerability stood helpless before royal judgment. Like Anne before her, Catherine entered the world of Tudor royalty believing proximity to a king meant security, yet inside the tower that closeness revealed how quickly favor could become doom. And through stories like hers, the tower kept revealing the same brutal lesson, that near absolute power, youth, beauty, intimacy, and even innocence could still offer no protection. That lesson became even more heartbreaking in the case of Lady Jane Grey, a young woman pulled into a struggle for the throne, then carried by political ambition toward the tower. She was proclaimed queen, but her reign lasted only days, and that brief moment of elevation made her fall even more tragic, because power touched her before destroying her. Once she entered the tower, her story changed from royal claim to human tragedy, as a teenage ruler became another fragile life trapped inside England's merciless dynastic machinery. Her death remains unforgettable because she seems less like an ambitious usurper and more like someone used by stronger hands, then abandoned when the struggle for succession turned violent. And by the time her story joined Anne's and Catherine's, a tower had become more than a prison of stone, becoming a monument to how dynastic power consumed vulnerable lives. Yet not every tower tragedy ended in certainty, because some of its darkest stories became mysteries, and none has lingered longer than the fate of the princes. After Edward IV died, his young son Edward V and his brother Richard were brought into the tower, where a future coronation should have awaited them, but uncertainty arrived instead. Their uncle, Richard of Gloucester, soon took the crown as Richard III, and as the boys disappeared from public view, suspicion began growing into one of history's greatest unanswered questions. Many believe Richard ordered their murder, yet historians still debate the evidence, because the tower kept its silence, and over time, silence itself became part of the story's power. That is why the princes in the tower still haunt history, not just because they vanished, but because their disappearance left behind a space people have never stopped trying to fill. And because that silence was never fully broken, the tower's reputation grew darker still, becoming a place where history, rumor, and fear blended so completely they became almost inseparable. That darker reputation was strengthened by the way executions were remembered, because although many imagined constant death inside the tower, its most powerful terror from select, unforgettable punishments. Only a small number were executed within the tower itself, and that rarity made those deaths more chilling, because the people chosen were often famous, noble, or dangerously significant. Most executions linked to the tower happened publicly on Tower Hill, where crowds could watch, which meant punishment was never only physical, but also a spectacle of warning. That is what made the tower so feared, because even when death was rare inside its walls, the possibility of disgrace, confinement, and public ruin remained terrifyingly alive. And once fear like that settles into a place, even the rooms inside it begin to feel different, because the tower's chambers held not only bodies, but waiting, memory, dread, and silence. Some prisoners passed time writing, or praying, while others carved their names and beliefs into the walls, leaving behind proof that fear had not erased them. Those markings matter because they turn cold stone into human testimony, showing that inside this fortress of royal authority, private voices still struggled to survive and be remembered. That is also why the tower's reputation was shaped not just by death, but by anticipation. Because for many, the hardest part was waiting without knowing release, judgment, or ruin. And from that long tension grew another side of the tower's legend, because once a place absorbs enough suffering, people begin believing that some presence never truly leaves. That belief gave rise to the tower's ghost stories, where history and imagination merged so tightly that figures like Anne Boleyn seemed to remain part of the fortress forever. People spoke of her walking after death, and whether believed or not, those stories mattered because they turned memory into presence, making the tower feel emotionally alive. And once legends took hold, the tower stopped being only a historical site, because it also became a place where visitors felt they were standing inside unresolved human emotions. But the tower's power was not built on legends alone, because alongside imprisonment and execution, it also guarded something dazzling, sacred, and deeply symbolic to the monarchy itself. Because inside the same fortress associated with fear, the crown jewels were kept, proving the tower was never just about punishment, but also about continuity, ceremony, and royal identity. That identity mattered because the jewels were not ordinary treasures, but living symbols of monarchy, used in coronations and state ritual, linking the tower directly to the performance of power. So within one fortress, England placed both condemned prisoners and sacred regalia, which is exactly why the tower feels so unforgettable, holding terror and splendor inside the same walls. And the tower's meaning grew even stranger when it also housed exotic animals, because for centuries, lions and other creatures turned royal authority into a spectacle of wonder. That may sound unusual now, but in earlier centuries, rare animals signaled wealth, reach, and prestige, proving that power did not only punish, it also displayed marvels. By then, the tower had become more than a fortress or prison, becoming a concentrated world of monarchy, fear, ritual, spectacle, and memory, all enclosed in one historic space. And because it held so many meanings at once, the tower survived changes in monarchy, war, and time, adapting its purpose while never losing the shadow of its past. Its role as a royal residence slowly faded, yet the tower remained essential, because states rarely abandon places that already carry authority, memory, and the weight of public imagination. So the tower continued serving the state in other ways, storing arms, protecting treasure, and reinforcing the idea that monarchy depended not only on crowns, but structure. Even centuries later, an old fortress could still be used during national crisis, which is why the tower's story did not end with Tudor drama or medieval fear. Instead, the tower entered the modern age, carrying all its older meanings with it, proving that some places remain powerful because history never fully releases them. That was especially clear during wartime, when the tower briefly returned to one of its oldest identities, reminding the modern world that this place had always stood close to state power. Even in the 20th century, prisoners and executions became part of its story again, proving the tower was not merely a relic, but a symbol authorities could still reactivate. That modern return to punishment is unsettling, because it shows the tower's darker meanings were never completely buried. They could reappear whenever fear and national emergency demanded them. Yet survival gave the tower another meaning too, because as violence receded, memory became its main force, and the fortress slowly turned from instrument into witness. And once it became a witness to its own past, the tower invited the world to look at it differently, not only with fear, but with curiosity, remembrance, and awe. That curiosity is part of why the tower now stands as a World Heritage Site, preserved not just for Britain, but for everyone trying to understand power, memory, architecture, and survival. People come there for many reasons, some for kings and queens, some for executions and mysteries, and some simply to stand inside a place where history feels physically present. And that physical presence matters because the tower teaches history differently. Instead of reading about power, visitors feel how closely stone, fear, ceremony, and memory once lived together. That is also why myths remain attached to it, because when a place holds enough suffering, ceremony, and unanswered questions, facts alone rarely satisfy the human imagination. So the tower survives in two forms at once, as documented history and as emotional legend, and together, those two lives make it one of Britain's most powerful places. And when a place holds both truth and legend so completely, it begins revealing something deeper, not only about England's past, but about how human beings understand power itself. Because the tower was never powerful by walls alone, it mattered because people felt what it represented: conquest, judgment, continuity, and the terrifying possibility of falling from favor. That is why queens, princes, rivals, prisoners, and even visitors across centuries have all responded to it emotionally, because the tower turns abstract authority into something visible and physical. In that sense, the tower is more than a monument, it is a lesson in human behavior, showing how fear, symbolism, ritual, and architecture can work together to shape obedience. And once you see that clearly, the tower stops being just a famous landmark, because it becomes a mirror reflecting the ways all societies try to make power endure. That endurance explains why the tower still speaks across centuries, because even after kings, wars, and empires changed, its stones continued holding memory, authority, punishment, spectacle, and survival. Because of that, the tower never became simple history, it remained emotionally alive, a place where facts, myths, fear, ceremony, and memory continued standing side by side. That is why people still come searching for more than information, because inside these walls, they feel ambition, loss, mystery, and power as something almost physically present. In the end, the Tower of London is not remembered only for what happened there, but for what it reveals: that power always seeks walls, symbols, rituals, and stories. And that is why the tower still endures, not just as a fortress, but as a living mirror of human ambition, fear, memory, and the endless desire to make power last. Queens were executed here, princes vanished here, and for nearly 1,000 years, these walls have guarded secrets dark enough to haunt history itself. This is the Tower of London. If this journey through the Tower of London pulled you into history, mystery, and power, then like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing which part of the story stayed with you most.